Good evening, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. And so this video is called Examining a Worthy Inclusion, the Johannine comma of 1 John 5:7-8. And this is by Timothy Decker. So this is his article number 7. Now, on his website, all of the articles have these numbers at the beginning. Now, I was clicking on number 7, and it would come up and say I'm not allowed to view the preview drafts. And so that's why I haven't done number 7, because I thought it was not uploaded yet. But I actually just searched before for Timothy Decker, and when I searched for the name, it came up with a whole bunch of articles, and number 7 was one of them. And so I thought, well, there you go. It's already up. It's been up since October the 1st. I guess it's just a bit of an internal issue that they have with trying to link those, and that's fine. I was intending on looking at some of the other articles that he had done on Psalm 12, but we can go through this article. So hopefully I can get through this. I probably won't go for as long as I usually go for, because it is late at night here. It's nearly 10 o'clock. And I just saw that this article was available. So I thought, well, I may as well start chipping away at it. And so if I start fading, or if I turn into a pumpkin, you know what's going on, because I have been up since very early in the morning, and I've been very, very busy today. And so I would recommend that everyone who listens to this after the fact listen to this on 1.5 speed. That just helps you get through it. I always recommend people listen to material on 1.5 unless it's very, very technical. Some people you can't, like if someone talks like a Ben Shapiro type of voice, or even James White used to be like that, but now he's slowed down a little bit. I can listen to him on 1.5, but sometimes his older stuff, I have to listen to it on normal speed. But anyway, I'm going to start going through this. So Docky is in the house. Now, obviously, this is not the usual time that I do videos. I usually do them early in the morning here in Australia. So this is very late at night. So we might be entering into the early morning session in the United States. So that would be early Thursday morning, where most people, probably 95% of people who listen to my content are in the United States. So Tried with Fire is in the house from Florida, lovely Florida on the East Coast there. So let's just start getting through this. Now, what it seems like, I haven't read through this article because I only just found that it was online. It seems like he starts to go through some of the apparatus, which is in the 28th edition. And then he's looking at the Textus Receptus tradition with the critical apparatus. So he's looking at all of those, and then he's talking about basically what is in the Textus Receptus and differences in TR editions. And so we'll go through this. Now, as I said, I mightn't be able to get through it all tonight. It does look complicated. It does look technical, but we will get through as much as we possibly can. So this is called A Worthy Inclusion, the Johannine comma of 1 John 5:7-8, part 7, the comma among the Textus Receptus tradition. So let's just start reading through this. It is not irresponsible to ask those adherents of the Textus Receptus or the received text, which TR. So then he's got a link here, which goes, see Mark Ward, which Textus Receptus, a critique of confessional bibliology, Detroit Baptist Seminary Journal, 25, 2020, 51-77. I would just say to Timothy Decker that I it's sort of been answered so many times, which received text, that it's almost what it's showing is people are just not listening to TR people. When I get asked, I say directly which TR, and so I'm not messing around. Almost, I think pretty much everyone who's ever been on my show here on this platform has been in agreement with Edward Hills that the Textus Receptus that underlies the King James Version is the TR that they go with. Now, Scrivener has attempted to reflect that in his Greek edition, which is 99.99% Beezers, between 99.99 and 99.98% Beezers. So it's not Scrivener's text. It's basically Beezers with a little sprinkling on it, a few different spellings here and there. Now, there's about 20 differences between Theodore Beezer's text and the King James. So I used to point people to the 1598, but then I started to understand, there's a few slight differences. Now, there's probably about 20 translatable differences. So it's almost like we're splitting hairs. We're talking about one change every 13 chapters. That's how minute this is. But when you go through it, it's like, okay, well, they are changes. And what it shows is the King James translators didn't just slavishly follow Beezer, although they did 99.99 to 99.98% of the time. But they actually did their own textual criticism, and they worked out a tiny few little tweaks, and they went with those, which is reflected in their translation. And so that's why Scrivener didn't just do Beezer's text. He did Beezer's and he embellished on that and added his own material to that, because the King James is the final Textus Receptus edition. Because when you have that many scholars working on a text, they could have all worked on a Greek text and shown that to the world, but they weren't commissioned to do so. They were commissioned to do an English text, and it was so close to Beezer's, it would have looked like plagiarism. And how can they just get a text and just write their name on it? Basically, there's 20 differences, but they did have a unique Textus Receptus edition, and so pretty much everyone who's from the confessional bibliology, I'm talking about Jeff Riddle, like even Will Kinney's been on my program. Many people I've had Phil Stringer. They've all been in agreement with what Hill says there, that it's the underlying text of the King James Version. So it's not that hard. So when it's like, is it the second edition of Erasmus? It's like, no. Is it the first edition of Beezer? It's like, no. Like if Mark Ward could just go through and cross those off his list, it would come down to, okay, is it the underlying Greek text of the King James Version? It's like, yes, that's what it is. It's so basic. So from the start, we've got obviously Timothy Decker has been influenced by Mark Ward here. Mark Ward usually is not terribly interested in what confessional bibliology adherents have to say, or people like myself, what I have to say. When he was questioned about me, he just said, "Why does he hate me so much?" And it's like, why would you think that me critiquing your work is hatred? It's almost like, why is he a Nazi, or why is he a racist, or it's just ridiculous. And so I've gone through tons of his material. I've watched everything that he's ever brought out. And so obviously I'm going to have an opinion on that. And I find that what he has tried to do was co-opt what King James people were doing anyway. D.A. Waite had the defined King James Bible, looking at words which, some people didn't know that they had changed the meaning. Some people knew. You could obviously tell. But I'd also been working on that with my 2016 edition, and doing that type of update. And so he's never acknowledged that I've done that. He just says, "Why do I hate him?" even though he did quote me, I'm pretty sure it's even in that article, he quotes me saying that the label KJVO is a slander term. It's like using the N word, which is, I was given an example of a slander term, which N word is like a slander term. In some cultures, they don't mind using certain words and terms, but in others, it's very offensive to use certain words and terms. And so I was saying that some people can label themselves as King James only. They can say whatever they want. But for me, I can't understand how I fit in with the Ruckman crowd or the like. They don't want me in their group, and they've fought against me for years. I run the page exposing Peter Ruckman on Facebook and have done so for years and years, openly using my own name, not in secret or anything. And the Ruckmanites have come out and howled against me for 15 years. I was doing that while Peter Ruckman was alive, because I separate from him and his racism, where he says that I'm mentally sick because I didn't marry a white person. He says I've mixed my race and so I'm mentally sick. It's like, whatever. But Mark Ward continues to call people Ruckmanites if you think the King James is without error. I mean, I think half of the books on my shelf are without error. I mean, if I was to get any of these books and go through them and spell check them and look for mistakes, like some of them are perfect. They've just been proofread very well. Some of them you go through Grammarly and other programs and you can get all the bugs out. The thing is, the King James just got rid of all the bugs. So, like, yes, there was print issues and things like that, and he, she Bible and the Wicked Bible and things like that. But it's like that, you can't put that on to the translators. They did a perfect translation job. They make out that that's an impossibility. So anyway, I could talk about Mark Ward until the cows come home, but it is the first link there, so that's why I've started to do that. But let's continue. Though the TR is a fairly stable tradition in itself, its rendering of the comma reinforces the question of which edition of the TR is to be purest. Obviously, the TR underlying the King James. This is not meant to be a blight on the TR tradition per se. Rather, it calls into question even more so the validity of the comma's inclusion in 1 John 5:7-8. If the TR, as the primary tradition of the Greek New Testament that accepts the reading of the comma, is itself unstable, then that could call into question the comma itself. So this is obviously not my opinion. This is Timothy's. I'll just catch up on some of these comments. So Docky is living the dream. Nexus KJV. Hello, Bob. Good to see you. And he's on his mobile phone. David Anker says, Daniel 3:25 KJV says, who is the fourth man in the fire? Yes, it is Jesus Christ. He says it's the Son of God. And it's interesting, the word God there is in the singular. In the very next verse and preceding verses, it's translated as singular. And so that's why we say the Son of God, because elsewhere it just says God. It says, like, Nebuchadnezzar still is talking about God in the singular, but people just read into it. Oh, he's a pagan, so he would have had a plurality of gods. So he must have said a son of the gods, this type of thing. And that's just read into it. Pastor Brett is in the house. Good morning, mate. Mark Ward is still on your radar. I stopped watching him. I watch everything that Mark brings out. I also watch everything that James White brings out, and pretty much just to keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on. But this article on the Comia-Hanium, the first link is to the Which Textus Receptus article, which critiques confessional bibliology. So I sort of had a little bit of a rant about that and how it seems disingenuous that he's asked the question and he still thinks that it's unanswered when so many people have answered it. Like Jeff Riddle's answered it. It was even Vince Krivda. He did a whole article on it. Now, I debated Vince on Easter probably about 6 years ago. He's a really nice guy. He's a confessional bibliology type of guy. And we had a good debate on Easter. And I think he was sort of more so coming from a bit of a reform type of thing, saying any type of church celebration is wrong. So it was an interesting take that he had. But he's answered Mark Ward there. And so anyway, I won't continually go through and rehash the Mark Ward stuff. But okay, Pastor Brett has dropped $20 into the coffer. Thanks, Brett. That'll go towards this channel. Okay, I'll keep reading. And so it says here in the next paragraph, it has been proven already. So he's proven something. Let's check it out. That the comma is on very shaky ground, according to the external evidence. I think that he didn't really go much into the Latin, because the interesting thing is with the Latin evidence, you have 90 to 95% of all the Latin manuscripts include the comma. And so what you see is, yes, Greek in the early church was very popular, but then it sort of contracted, and it was only really used in the Greek Empire, the Byzantines, Constantinople, around that area of Greece. And so Latin took over. Latin took over as the dominant world language, just like English is today. And so to have the comma in the Latin everywhere, that means that when they look at German translations, they go, oh, well, it just comes from the Latin. When they look at English translations, they go, oh, well, Wycliffe, even though he has Father, Son, and Spirit, not Father, Word, and Spirit, which is interesting, but he does have the comma there. They just ask from the Latin. So pretty much they just dismiss everything from the Latin, but it's almost like with the King James, the popularity of Latin was just like English is today. And so oftentimes, like even the Bible societies, when they first started in 1804, they were to use the Textus Receptus, they were to use the Masoretic text, but they were also to make Bibles that were equivalent to the King James. And so some people would even just translate starter editions from English, and then later on they would be tidied up by Greek and Hebrew scholars. So this type of thing was going on because the Greek equaled the English equaled the Greek, and the same with the Hebrew. And so if you were to translate something a certain way into another language, chances are that you're going to come up with the same translation, even if you're using the Greek or Hebrew, if you just translate it straight from the English. And so that's how prominent the King James has become, or had become, to the Bible societies in 1804. Obviously, Unitarians got involved with the Bible societies till 1831, only 25 years later, 26 years later. They had to break away. The Trinitarians broke away and started the Trinitarian Bible Society because so many Unitarians had jumped into the Bible societies, and that's why you see the degrading of the deity of Christ in so many of the verses, the Trinity, anything to do with the Spirit being God or Christ being God is usually diminished. And we saw the Trinitarian Bible Society. They came onto the scene, and they only wanted to do Textus Receptus Bibles, and they are still around today doing that. But it's a tragedy that the Unitarians took over so much of the Bible societies in those days, and then obviously 50 years later with Westcott and Hort, they had a Unitarian work with them, George Van Smith, who deleted so many parts of the scriptures to deal with the Father, the Son, and the Spirit being God. And 1 John 5:7 was just a part of that. So, so he's saying the comma is on shaky ground. So I would say, okay, well, what about the Latin? Now, he does mention the Latin, but he doesn't really go into the Latin. And he does mention some of the quotations of the early church writers, but he's not mentioning all of those places. And when you look at something like Cyprian, that's just explained away. When you look at Tertullian, it's just explained away. He's not going into the 461 bishops who in 480 stood against the Arians and used 1 John 5:7 in their confession. He's not talking about that. And so this is huge evidence. And so I guess when you're just having a cursory look at the type of evidence that, say, Dan Wallace would want you to look at, or Elijah Hixson, or you would come to those conclusions. But if you're actually looking at everything, if you're studying this and you're steel manning someone's argument, then you will come to the conclusion that there is a lot of evidence for the Comma Johanneum. So it says, and its historical pedigree is not much better, restricting it to one locale and language tradition. So it's saying it's only in one location, but that's like saying English is only in one location today. No, it's everywhere. Latin was absolutely everywhere. And the thing is, too, if you look at a lot of the biblical manuscripts, and some Bible manuscripts would have, the works of Origen in there, or they would talk from the position of early church writers and things like that. So what you see is sometimes in a document that might be 10th century, 11th century, 12th century, you'll see people who are writing in Greek, and they will just put the Father, the Word, and the Spirit there. They'll just talk about it. Or they'll quote someone saying something about that. And it's all the way through Greek writing. And it's not like it's just not there. Now, we know that in 1 John 5:7, in the Greek manuscripts, that dropped out. Now, how that's explained, well, even the issue of Jerome is not really talked about in these articles. And I understand I'm not having a dig at Timothy Decker for not including everything, because you can only do so much, and these aren't really scholarly articles in a sense where this isn't like completely definitive like Grantley MacDonald's work or Mike Ferrando's work, this type of thing. This is more so just like a summary. And but he's not talking about Jerome and how Jerome said that unfaithful scribes were taking this reading out of the text. And so it's very clear. And it should be noted that some people think that document is still called Pseudo Jerome. There's no reason to call it Pseudo Jerome. It's been clarified by manuscript evidence that is Jerome saying that. And Codex Valdensis in 1546 does not have the comma in it, but in the preface to 1 John, it says unfaithful scribes are taking this out. But what you'll find is in the Carver text, which is 8th century, it has the same it has the same preface saying unfaithful scribes are taking it out, but it also has it in the text. So there were some that took it out, there were some that kept it. And so that's got to be acknowledged. And also there were people looking back on what Cyprian said in about 250 and saying that he was quoting the comma. And I actually just put up something by Michael Maynard. I might actually just get this up because it sort of does deal with this. Now, if I go to my website, now if you want to know what I'm actually doing with my website, you can go to my contributions and you can see exactly what I've been working on. And so I've been working on all this other stuff James 5:12, Beza, minuscule 146, 1 John 5:7, Revelation 1:8, etc. So I just put in Michael Maynard, and he said this about the comma. Walter Thiel was my professor at Tübingen. He works at the Vitas Latina Institute in Burgon, Germany. I was delighted to discover in his article in 1959, where he argued against the common view of Tischendorf and Griesbach, who said that Cyprian, one of the oldest church father, quoted it. What did Griesbach and Tischendorf say? They said that Cyprian was just looking at the 8th verse and he just allegorized those witnesses as heavenly ones. But Thiel in 1959 argued, no, Cyprian did not merely allude to verse 8. He actually had a Latin manuscript in his hand, which had 1 John 5:7. So Thiel is going against the crowd, yet Thiel is a Westcott and Hort advocate. Further, Thiel is regarded as the foremost scholar of Latin biblical manuscripts, yet he's in favor of the view that Cyprian actually had 1 John 5:7 in that Latin manuscript he held in his hands, although Thiel still regards the verse as an interpolation. Now, I asked Dr. Thiel, what was your view 30 years ago? Do you still believe this today? He replied in German, which said, yes, I am alone. This means with respect to the view that Cyprian quoted verse 7 instead of alluding to verse 8. Thus, when it comes to issues on Latin manuscripts, all the professors in Germany consult Thiel. But when it comes to his view on the Johannine comma, they do not want to listen to him. But that is about all the time I have now. So that was Maynard in Defense of the Comma in the Burning Bush, Far Eastern Bible College, Volume 3, Number 1, January 1997. And so I just put that in just before. So isn't that interesting that Thiel, a Westcott and Hort advocate, majoring in Latin to the point where he's become, an expert in that, in 1959 said that, and then 30 years later he was asked by Maynard, and he said, "Yeah, I'm alone with that position." So, and I don't expect Timothy to know this. Obviously, I'm adding stuff, sometimes daily to my website about the Comma Johanneum, and so. It's one of those things where after a while you know things so well that you read an article like this and you can just see holes and you don't even know why. But here is a Westcott and Hort guy saying, no, Cyprian quoted 1 John 5:7 in a Latin Bible, and so that's the sort of evidence that should be strongly in favor of Cyprian quoting it, so obviously it's said here that it's only in one locale and it's in one language tradition, it's only in the Latin sort of thing. No, and also the amount of Greek people quoting this, when you go through my website, go through Mike Ferrando's material, there's so much information pointing to early church witnesses quoting the comma, allegorizing about the comma, praying in the name of the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit, and saying this is a Trinity. Where are they getting that from? And so my understanding is they're getting that from the Scriptures. And so let's just continue. Even the arguments for its inclusion from the internal evidence is not convincing. Well, it's not convincing to Timothy, but it is to me. At least not demanding the external evidence be overturned. See Part 4 and Part 5. And so I think as per the previous videos, obviously this is number 8. So I have gone through those, and I chatted with Timothy on Facebook, and I asked him about the Greek, the scholars like Eugenius Vulgaris or Georgios Barbeniotis, and he said that he'd already answered that. But when you go back to these articles, he's answered about a Hebrew parallelism not about the Greek parallelism. And so that was sort of my point. And he said, I've answered that. So when I went to these articles going through them, I'm like, you haven't answered that at all. So I think that he is either misunderstanding the evidence there, or thinking that the Hebrew parallelism that is brought up by Charles Foster is what Eugenius Vulgaris was talking about, which is not the case. And so, and it says, if there is disagreement as to both its meaning and legitimacy throughout history, so it says part 6 that he sort of proved that, perhaps there is good reason to exclude the comma from our Bibles, as Erasmus believed and Luther did in his German translation. Now, this is not really true, because Erasmus, he thought that it was simply just not in the text. Now, contrary to popular opinion, Erasmus wasn't just back translating from the Latin everywhere. I watched a video the other day and they just said Erasmus back translated from the Latin the comma Johannine, then they mentioned the last 6 verses of Revelation. None of those were back translated from the Latin. There was a few words in Revelation chapter 22, verse 19. And so Erasmus spotted homoioteiton there, and he said he spotted it in his Greek manuscripts, plural. So he had back translated from the Latin one tiny little spot. He spoke about it in his annotations. It's never mentioned anywhere else that he back translated. But so what, obviously people who are dishonest and people who don't like the facts, the true facts of the situation, what they do is they say, well, Erasmus just did this everywhere, So they found this manuscript. There was a guy called Franz Delitzsch. He found a manuscript with 6 complete verses gone from the last section of Revelation 22. So from Revelation 22:16 through to 21, the end page is torn off. And he just sort of pronounced that this is the one that Erasmus used. Now, it was a Reuchlinian manuscript. Reuchlin was a manuscript collector, though. He could have had 20 of these. He could have had 3 of them. We don't know. But the Andreas commentaries are very popular. I think there's like 100 of them. In the 300 manuscripts that we have of Revelation, there's like 100 Andreas commentary manuscripts. And so these are... I guess it's like having a MacArthur study Bible or something like that. Imagine if in 1,000 years they were going back through piles of Bibles and that they kept finding MacArthur study Bibles, and they're going with that. But it does contain the text. And so, Franz Delitzsch, he found this manuscript and just said, this is the one that Erasmus used. And so instead of reading Erasmus's annotations and believing him, they distrusted him and said, well, he's just a liar. He's lying. He actually didn't just amend a few words. He amended 136 words, the last 6 verses. And he lied to everyone because everyone just believed him at that time and said that's what he did. So 250 years later, they've discovered this thing. Actually, it was probably more like 300 years later. They've discovered this manuscript and just pronounced that it's the one Erasmus used. But when they go back through the book of Revelation, there's lots of different changes. So what they say is, he back translated from the Latin there as well. And this other place, there as well. Obviously, Erasmus is a bit of a loser, liar, idiot, slipped on a banana peel sort of guy, So they make up all these anecdotes about Erasmus. He's rushing to print like some nervous, old lady trying to make you a quick cup of coffee or something. And slipping on banana peels, he just made these errors. And so this type of thing has gone into the Erasmus anecdote collection, where he rushed to print, where he promised that he'd put the comma Johannine in it if anyone found it anywhere, sort of thing, and all this sort of stuff. Now, what Bible did Erasmus grow up on? Erasmus grew up on the Latin Bible that has 1 John 5:7 in it. And so he knew that reading. And what's amazing is in his 1521 paraphrase, he includes the comma Johannine there. So that's before his insertion in 1522. Now, if you read Erasmus's annotations, he clearly says why he put it in, and he had good reason to put it in. And he said that he had the British Codex Britannicus. Now, Codex Britannicus is not Codex Montfortianus. If you read his annotations, he clearly writes it out in Greek, exactly what he had in Codex Britannicus. And it doesn't match Codex Montfortianus, but that's another manuscript that it's like, oh, well, this is another one that Erasmus used. And so we see there's deception about the book of Revelation. We see the thing is too, if Erasmus was just going to back translate from Latin, why wouldn't he do it at 1 John 5:7? Why is he waiting on a Greek manuscript? It just goes, the story doesn't add up, because Erasmus was waiting for Greek evidence. Once he found Greek evidence, I mean, you're talking about a guy who's a manuscript, what would you call him? Like a prodigy as a child. He was copying manuscripts in his Augustinian monastery. So he knew how to spot things like homoouteton and parablepsis, etc. Brilliant guy. And so when it comes to the Greek language, he became just as skilled in Greek as he was in Latin. He went and lived with the Greeks. He worked as a print shop editor and a proofreader in Aldus Manutius's print shop for 9 months in Venice. I mean, you're talking about the leader and probably the best ever printer of Greek works who's ever existed. And Erasmus is right there in the thick of it, surrounded by native Greek-speaking people, and they revered him as one of the greatest Greek linguists of that time. And so all you have to do is just read through Erasmus's annotations, and you'll see what he says about the comma. But here it's like, they should exclude it. And so Erasmus believed that, and so did Luther. But that's not the full story, because Erasmus restored it, changed his mind on that. And that's where people go, well, they must have held a gun to his head. The Catholic Church were going to burn him at the stake. And so he just went, oh, okay. He was just that type of guy. He was a compromiser. He was just a bit of an idiot. Probably slipped on a banana peel somewhere along the line and accidentally put it in, or maybe, someone threatened him, or maybe someone made a manuscript. Here you got a guy who's grown up like writing manuscripts, copying manuscripts in his Augustinian monastery. And then you've got people who just write a whole Greek text, apparently Codex Montfortianus, put it in front of him, and he can't tell whether it's recent or not. And he just feels like he's pressured to put it in. So he made a rash wager, which doesn't exist, and he puts this in, this type of anecdote. So, and the thing is too, Luther, he did soften to the concept of having 1 John 5:7 in there. Now, I don't have that information in front of me, and I was surprised that I didn't have that much information on Luther on my website. I guess I read a lot of material. I do cover a lot of stuff, and I have heard quite a lot of people say Luther did soften to that. But anyway, definitely Erasmus, he changed his mind on that issue. So then Timothy says, I might just catch up with these questions and comments. Tried with fire is living the dream. And Anchor David says, are there early church fathers that have sermons on this verse? Well, I mean, Cyprian, he does talk about that it is written, I am the Father of one. And he says, and again, it is written of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, these three are one. And so it's pretty much quoting the whole verse, except for Son is word. But he says it is written of them, not it is written, and he's quoting it verbatim sort of thing. And so, but yeah, there are quite I would recommend that you Google "The Witness of God is Greater" by Mike Ferrando. And so if you go there, he's got quite an extensive list of people talking about the comma, people preaching about it, people examining it, talking at length about this verse. And so Tribe with Fire says, likewise, I think Nick only mentioned Ward because he's mentioned in the article. Pastor Brett says, the authenticity of the KJV text is unquestionable. People can reject the truth, but they cannot refute it. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Tribe with Fire says, yeah, well said. Hudson is in the house. Pastor Brett says, modern text critics rely on Greek manuscripts, but the Bible was always translated in the lingua franca of the known world. Latin is the language they should look into. And that's the thing. Erasmus, he was looking at, I usually describe it as 3 in the closed class of witnesses. You've got your Greek, you've got your Latin, and you've got your early church writers. So the Greek corrects the Latin polishes the Greek, but they're both guided by the writings of the early church. And so sometimes we look at, the woman caught in adultery, for example. We're looking at manuscripts, but then you'll see the early church writers talking about this, speaking about it, to the point where even critical text guys say, well, it probably happened. Jesus actually did that, but it's just shouldn't be in the Bible. It's like, how much closer do you have to get when it's not just an apostle saying something, they say Jesus did this. So they're going right back to Jesus, and it's like, but they still don't want to include it in the Bible. It's ridiculous, So, and the thing is with this verse, if you ask them, okay, how much evidence do you want for 1 John 5:7? Because I'm finding new stuff all the time, and they would be like there's 500 manuscripts of 1 John. Now, if I said, okay, if it appeared in 50 manuscripts, would you consider it? They'd be like, no. It's like, okay, 200 manuscripts? No. 400 manuscripts? No. 500? No. They would say it would have to be in Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Because Vaticanus and Sinaiticus don't have it, it doesn't really matter about majority or whatever. They just want to delete it. Because all of a sudden, everyone gets concerned about the majority text when it comes to this verse. Like James White and other critical text guys, they all become all of a sudden interested in the majority text and worried that, we've got to follow the majority, but they don't do that anywhere else. Most of the time, their readings are completely minority, with Vaticanus and Sinaiticus many times being the only witness. Sifted Sand says, hey, Hudson, and God bless all who listen and watch in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Thanks, Sifted Sands. Tried with Fire saying, I have to get going, but we'll be listening. Okay, so Timothy said, having collated 30 editions of the TR tradition in the Johannine epistles, I would like to share the results of that collation to 1 John 5:7-8 specifically. I'll make use of 2 different formats to display these results. The first is how the TR would appear if it was in a critical edition which displayed all of its variants in textual apparatuses. I have patterned this presentation after the Sigla of NA 28th edition. Secondly, I will use a line-by-line method similar to Reuben Swanson in order to present various readings among the TR tradition, according to each unique variant, of which there are 8. These 2 displays will demonstrate just how unstable the TR tradition is at 1 John 5:7-8. Okay, so obviously these are the words of Timothy Decker. I'm in disagreement with that, but he's going to show us. He's sort of made up an apparatus. He's gone through 30 manuscripts. I'm not sure how many I've gone through of 1 John, but as I mentioned, like say in 629, they just say, oh, it's just copied from a Latin manuscript, so they dismiss that. when you go through 918, there are places where there are marginal notes and things like that, which have not sufficiently, in my mind, been said to have come from a printed text, but that is usually what's said. And so anyway, let's look at this. So I'll try and explain it as much as I can to people who are just listening to this, because I know a lot of people don't watch it, they listen. Hudson says, how many Greek manuscripts of 1 John do we have before the 10th century? Well, that's where Mike Ferrando's interesting work comes in. Now, I might just get it up here because he does have that. Okay, where are we? He does have that information in the beginning of his book. Downloads, Witness of God is greater. Okay. Here we go. It is opened. Okay, where are we? Yeah, I might make this a little bit smaller. Yeah, here's an interesting one. Glory be to thee, Father. Glory be to thee, Word. Glory be to thee, Holy Ghost. And this is around 150 to 200 AD. So it's before Cyprian. Like, how can you get around that, you know? Okay, so I wanted to look at the manuscripts. I can't remember if it's this one or another download. The comma calmly considered, I think it might be. But if I actually type in 500, I know he was using that. Okay, let's continue. But yeah, this book here, The Witness of God is Greater, I would recommend everyone who's interested in this issue to download this book and read through it. There's just so much information. Okay, so it is. It might be on another download where he does have how many manuscripts sort of before the 10th century, and he answers that question. So anyway, I don't want to just bore you guys with that. And but yeah, definitely if you go to is it KJV debate.com. So this is Mike Holner's page, the PDF here, and here we go. So-called list of 500 manuscripts. It's exactly what we're looking for. And so let's have a quick look. So this is according to Mike Ferrando, and I'd love to go through and read all this. First century, none. So this is Greek manuscripts extant for 1 John 5, 7 to 8. First century, none. Second century, none. Third century, none. But we do have quotations of 1 John 5, 7 in these centuries. Fourth century, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. So obviously people are going to go with that. Fifth century, Alexandrinus. And then we have GA 48 here. And it's got 1 John 5, 5 to 21, 3 columns. And it says it's damaged and unreadable. You can't read it. So that's very interesting. I might even just grab that copy text. Let's just throw that up in there. So that makes it 2 from the 4th century, pretty much 1 from the 5th century, and another one's damaged. 6th century is GA 296, but that is also damaged and unreadable. 7th century, none. 8th century, none. And so he's got list of 500 by century. 8th to 9th century, 1. 9th century, 8. 10th century, 29. 11th century, 82. 12th century, 430. So you've got, before the 10th century, there's not much, but we've got so many quotations. And this is the thing, also, we haven't really dated Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, which we really should. We should have XRF technology going through and dating this. So, yeah, I'll throw that link here in the chat so everyone can go and just look at that PDF for yourself and give me some feedback on that, because that's a really interesting thing. I'll just have a quick look at this manuscript. Now, I was actually looking at a manuscript the other day. It was around about like 1150, and it had the Father, the Word, the Holy Spirit, the Holy Trinity. And it's like, I thought Erasmus made this up, you know what I mean? But it's in Greek writers talking about this. Okay, so that's obviously not the manuscript, so I will jump back from there. But yes, so very interesting. Codex Vaticanus Graecus 2061, 5th century. So I'm going to go through a lot of this material and put the information into my website. So I'll just shut that down and we'll get back to what's being said here. So NA 28th edition with critical apparatus, it has the Communianium here, or verse 7 here. Then it has verse 7 to 8. It's in the Latin, and it's got, some of the variants that occur in the Latin there. And then it's got, there are 3 that bear record on earth type of thing. So it's got Montfortianus, and then it's got 629. It's got a few other ones here, and then a whole bunch of other readings that sometimes it occurs in the text, sometimes it occurs in the margin. And Timothy continues and says, though the text is fairly clean with only a few sigla, the information in the apparatus looks congested, which it is. The NA 28 is simply displaying the variants highlighted in part 2 of this series. Truth be told, it only includes the general details of the various Greek manuscripts and their readings. It does not demonstrate the differences of readings for each witness, only that there are various readings by the VL superscripts. It also spends a lot more time than usual on the various Latin renderings. If we were only comparing the sigla in the main text of both, then the NA 28 has only one siglum indicating a textual variant, the and, which indicates different words used, namely the comma. Now compare this with the TR tradition if it had a critical apparatus much like the 28th. So I guess he's making his own sort of critical apparatus based upon the printed text of the Textus Receptus, or what is retroactively labeled as Textus Receptus. And so here we have variant like number 1 here, number 2 there, 3 there, 4 there, etc. So we see, this is verses 7 to 8, Elzevers, Aldus Minucius, and it goes through the Wolfcephalus, Collianus, the editions of Erasmus, Cessa, So it's got quite a lot of mention of lots of different people in that Reformation period. Complutensian polyglot, for example. So that's what he's got there. Unlike the NA28 text, there are a total of 8 sigla to include variation units among the witnesses. They include long omissions, different words or word order, and insertion, and a different spelling, sin. So I guess that's the one with the movable nu, which was mentioned. I mean, in all honesty, a movable nu is like absolutely nothing. But he has a link down here. Now, actually, I missed this number 2 link. So I might just quickly go there. The number 2 link. Yeah. So that was the Textus Receptus apparatus. The collation of the TR tradition is making use of Scrivener's 1881 edition of the Textus Receptus as a primary text and comparing all of the TR editions with Scrivener's. This is known as a diplomatic edition, which uses as its base text a manuscript or final edition, such as Scrivener's 1881. The NA28 is an eclectic text and apparatus seeking to ascertain from the evidence in the apparatus what the correct reading should be in the text. Okay, so then we've got number 3 here. So he's talking about the movable nu, and it says here, to include variations of the movable nu, I have displayed the siglum at the end of the word, the sign that indicates a different word or spelling. I mean, a movable nu, you would have Stephanus would not use it, and then Beza would use it, and then in his later editions he wouldn't use it. Yeah, this type of thing, it's just to do with their preference, really. It's sort of like a nothing. And among the variant unit marked, and he's got this here with a 1, there are 4 different renderings of that phrase. The convenience of such an apparatus is that it makes a lot of variant readings. It marks a lot of variant readings in such a small amount of space. Nevertheless, it is highly congested and disheveled 2 verses. As will be displayed below, the TR tradition has actually produced 8 total variations of the comma. Okay, so let's have a look at that. When I say the tradition evolved or developed, I mean that very literally. So he's got link to 4 here. Parker implied this of the TR, authorized by Erasmus, canonized by Stephanus, and deified by Beza. Textus Receptus reigned preeminent in the Reformed churches of the 16th century. Well, it was the only text that, there was no other text. That there was the Textus Receptus, and that was it. So someone like Parker, it's like criticizing all the horses in a race, but they don't have a horse in this race, but anyway, among the TR tradition, the well-known phrase would not appear exactly as it does in Scrivener's final TR form until Stephanus's 4th and final 1551 edition. And even then, later editions, such as some of Beza's, would revert. Now, if we were to ignore the final variation of the last word of verse 8, a final nu. So he's talking about like the final nu. It's like, man, that is just simply like, it's the most unnecessary thing to talk about. And it just makes me wonder, like, is he scratching around for differences if he's going with the final nu? Okay, but he's saying, okay, now if we ignore the final variation, the movable nu, okay, so he's actually saying, perhaps we can ignore that. Okay, then we could move this earlier to the 2nd edition of Stephanus of 1549. So he's saying, okay, you go to the 1551 edition, and I'm pretty sure the 1551 is just the 1550 edition, but with numbers. But we'll have to double check that. But then he's saying you can go right back to the 1549 because Stephanus's first edition was in 1546. But what's the difference? A movable nu. It's just nothing. So there you would have one, I would say 2 or 3 editions all in agreement, But anyway, he's going to go through all these details, so we're going to see all this. Most notably, the inclusion of the comma did not begin until Erasmus's 3rd edition of 1522, and even then it reads almost perfectly with the Latin Vulgate. Dung dung. What about Codex Britannicus? What about where Erasmus said he got it from? Okay. Then it says omitting the articles. So anything that doesn't have articles is just got to come from the Latin, although oftentimes what you see in the Greek, you see that the articles aren't even in verse 8 in some of these places. So we've just got to be careful about making these blanket statements that it just means that it comes from the Latin. Could it come from the Latin? Yes. But it doesn't mean necessarily that always is the case. Latin has no articles. And following the Latin word order, in his 4th and 5th editions, he would include the Greek articles, but still maintain the Latin word order. Notice he's saying it's a Latin word order. Timothy really needs to read the annotations of Erasmus, and he can clearly see where he got his reading from, which was Codex Britannicus, and it's not Codex Montfortianus because the readings differ. However, Aldine, Gerbelius, Coffel, Collinnaeus do not include the Trinitarian formula at all. The first Stephanus edition, 1546, would transpose a couple of the words. The final 3 minor octavo editions of Beza would add a word, and the Complutensian polyglot traversed its own unique path. Okay, but it does have the comma in it. So Aldine, the Aldine edition is based upon the works of Erasmus. Gerbelius, I'm pretty sure that is in, was it 1522? So around about the same year that Erasmus amended his text. Coffel, I'm pretty sure it's 1524, and Collinnaeus 1534. So you're talking about just after Erasmus, and so and the thing is too, if these guys are doing their own textual work, to find a Greek manuscript with that reading in it is rare. And so the first Stephanus edition, 1546, would transpose a couple of the words. The final 3 minor octavo editions of Beza would add a word, and the Complutensian polyglot traverse its own unique path. Now, I readily admit that the variations among the 30-plus editions of the Textus Receptus that I consulted are very minor. Most differences are omissions of the Greek article, changing word order for Holy Spirit, or adding "and" to the list of heavenly witnesses. Yet these differences reflect the likelihood that the Johannine comma developed over time and actually arose from the Latin text handed down from the Western Church. So now he's looking at the printed editions, and he's saying you can tell that this comes from the Latin, and the Latin from the Western Church, and it just crept its way into the Greek. But how do you explain, like someone say, like Joseph Bryannius, who 150 years just before Erasmus quoted it verbatim as Scrivener has it today? And so how do you explain that? And I've noticed some people saying, well, he just, when that was getting printed, they just grabbed Erasmus's text and put it in there, and this type of thing. And so you've always got to be, there's always some sort of skeptical view on everything. But let's continue. But the point here is, again, one of stability. It is more than fair to say that the inclusion of the heavenly witnesses in this Trinitarian formula is a staple to the TR tradition, Even the small variations among the various TR editions that depart from the common TR reading are extremely minor in terms of meaning and translation. I only include them here to be thorough and to show that the TR is not as uniform as often claimed. I mean, so he's got a link here, number 5. For another example of this, see my guest article on the Evangelical Textual Criticism blog, a critical apparatus for the Textus Receptus tradition, March 2024. And so I think I critiqued that. But it's sort of like, okay, so if I was to ask anyone, like say Jeff Riddle, so which TR do you go with? Now, Jeff Riddle, actually, I just brought his name up because it just came to my head. But Jeff Riddle and some of the confessional guys say, look, the Textus Receptus that the King James translators used, it was mostly Beza, but it did have a few readings from older TR editions. And that's true. But I tend to, what that can do is open up a can of worms to go, oh, so you're defending the Complutensian polyglot there. Well, it might only be that section that the King James translators felt that was an accurate reading. Like, say, for example, in John chapter 8, verse 6, where he's writing in the ground and it says, as though he heard them not. Now, that is omitted as 2 Greek words in the text of Beza, but it is in the King James. And so after the Blaney edition, they put that in italics, but it is in the text of Scrivener, the latest edition of the TR. And so showing that the King James translators in 1611, they didn't have an italic. They thought that it was warranted to have in the text. But it goes back to the Complutensian polyglot. So what can happen is people go, oh, which TR do you follow? Do you follow Erasmus? And what they're trying to do is muddy the waters here, where I'm like, I don't, at the end of the day, I don't really care what the 1550 says in Jude somewhere. You know what I mean? Oftentimes there's these readings that are just wrong, but I go with what the underlying text of the King James has, because I believe that they were superior scholars. So you had Erasmus, you had Stephanus, you had Beza, and it was going through a process of purification. Now, I'm not saying the whole, King James 7 times purified sort of doctrine thing. I'm just saying it's inevitable that when you start off something and you're going to a certain conclusion, which is what happened around 1611, they concluded a lot of things, and 60 of some of the most brilliant scholars in Europe worked on that text. So I think they did a fantastic job, and they finalized a bunch of things. So obviously you don't just go to Erasmus's first edition. You go to his final edition and go, okay, what was his conclusions after everything? Like if I wrote a book, like say my Revelation 16:5 book, I wanted to write that again as soon as I wrote it, but I was exhausted from it. Now, if I had the time and the money and all that, I would go back through and rewrite that book. Now, I could have done 5 editions by now because so much more information has come out. And also just wording things in a way so people can comprehend and understand what you're trying to get at. But you wouldn't just go back to Erasmus's first edition and go, see, there you go. That contradicts his third edition sort of thing. It's a progression. And then you see Stephanus working on that type of basis and getting his results. And then you see Theodore Beza taking that baton. And also Henry Stephanus, he worked on the text as well. But these guys... there were many others, Tremellius, Unius, Piscator. These guys all helped, but eventually Beza got it to 99.99%, and then the King James guys just put the cherry on top, and they did it in English, which is amazing. It's just an amazing thing, and so, but the King James is itself the final edition of the Textus Receptus. And so, the TR is not as uniform as often claimed. Okay, so who's like, I know someone like what's his name, Doug Wilson. He's like, I go with the 1550 Textus Receptus. It's like, why? I've heard people say I go with the Elzevirs, and it's like, well, why? Usually they don't have an argument. They've just picked something. It's like when some people just go, well, I'm mid-trib or I'm post-trib, and they don't really know the ramifications of that. They can't really explain to you why they think it. I mean, they could look up to someone who's already worked that out, but they're not that person, Oftentimes it's just they're just throwing this into the air and saying, I'm following that. So saying that the TR is not as uniform as is often claimed, I mean, even if Beza was the one who put that reading in, I mean, look at Revelation 16:5. Beza, he knew that it was the name of Jehovah there. I mean, none of the critical text scholars have known that for like 200 years. They've just been completely oblivious to that. But Beza knew it, and like I've written a whole book on that. But Beza just knew it like it was just a normal everyday thing that everyone should know. Well, the name of Jehovah is explained in Revelation 16:5, and it's a holy name. But and so I would trust the scholarship of Beza, that he got so many things right, and the more that I look into it, the more I realize that I don't know things. I need to be humbled in front of these people and say, you guys, it's like playing at a national level like NBL, and you're just a college guy, and you go along and you see them training, you see them winning matches, and you're like, man, I've got so much. I've got to learn so much. I've got so much to do. I need to know so much. These guys know so much more than me. And this is the thing, when you hear people say, Erasmus didn't know what he was doing, and they're sort of pitting TRs against each other, where's the critical text in all this time? It's not even in existence. But they're going with the fine-tooth comb through TR additions, you know what I mean? But anyway, that's what's happening. And like nearly all printed Greek New Testaments, there is a development and change over time with the goal of getting the text right. So I would agree with that. Calvin believed this to be the case, as he himself likely changed Greek New Testaments over time. He would say of this passage's inclusion, it is found in the best and most approved copies. And so it says here, Calvin's commentary at 1 John 5:7. And, we've often discussed that. And I think it was Francis Turretin said a very similar thing. Likely meaning printed edition. Some have argued that Calvin was dissatisfied with the 1534 text of Colonnaeus. So this is the work of Geoffrey Riddle. He said that the work of Colonnaeus was more like a bit of a critical text, but I'm yet to sort of prove that. I know it's a claim by Jeff Riddle. I would like to see the differences between Colonnaeus and the 1546 of Stephanus, or the one that Calvin used, which is probably the 1550. So the text of Colonnaeus, which omitted the Yohanan comma and would switch to either Erasmus's 4th edition or Stephanus's 1546 first edition. Footnote 7, C. Parker, Calvin's New Testament commentaries. So that was written in 2006. So that could be the inspiration for Jeff Riddle's material on that. If that is the case, then Calvin commented on a general form of the Comma Johanneum, but not its final form as found in the Scrivener TR. Inconsequential as these earlier editions. It's a one big sentence, so I better read it. If that is the case, then Calvin commented on the general form of the Comma Johanneum, but not on its final form. But not its final form as found in the Scrivener TR. Inconsequential as these earlier editions may differ. Okay, that's a very awkwardly written sentence. So let me just not put this italicized part in it. If that's the case, then Calvin commented on the general form of the Comma Johanneum, inconsequential as these earlier editions may differ. Okay. Yeah, I would just say if Timothy does watch this, that could be worded a bit different. But I am getting tired. It's 1 hour 17 already. But I'll keep going through and see how far I can go. Not only that, but he pursued a printed Greek New Testament that reflects what he felt was a better text. Should we not also do likewise? Now let us display an interpretation of the above text and apparatus with a format inspired by Reuben Swanson's display of the Greek text. So this is see his 7 volumes titled New Testament Greek Manuscripts and Variant Readings Arranged in Horizontal Lines against Codex Vaticanus. Okay, so then he's got, similar to the display of the 10 Greek manuscripts that included the comma in part 2 of this series, we will render 30 different editions of the TR in a way to point out every unique reading. Okay, so he's got 30 editions that he goes through here. Scrivener's 1881, Stephanus's 4 editions, Beza's, so he's got his folio editions 4, his octavo editions 2, folios 1 to 4, octavos 1 and 2, Elsevier's 1624 and 1633, and the Oxford 1873. Okay. So I'm not sure, like the Oxford 1873 is not really something that I think many TR people would go to. And so here we have the Comma Johanneum, verse 7 and verse 8. So Erasmus's text is here. And then verse 8. Complutensian has this here. And so obviously he's underlined these and shown the difference between Scrivener's text and Complutensian. So basically we have the conjunction, we have ice 2 and epi. Those things are changed there. We seem to have a deletion there as well. It might be hoti. No, it's utoi. Okay. Erasmus's edition, his 3rd edition, which is followed by Berbelius and Cessa. So it has Pater Logos Kai Pneuma Agion. It doesn't have the articles, but notice the articles are not here either. And you think, this whole, the reason that I balk, and balking is it's actually more of an Australian term. I guess you do it in basketball. Here we do it in AFL, Australian Rules Football, where you pretend you're going to go that way and you sort of hold the ball and then you move it that way and you pass it. You've balked someone, and you do this in soccer as well. I guess some people might know the word, but I'm just explaining it just in case they don't. The reason that I balk at this, and I try to avoid this issue, is because Erasmus was like the living, breathing, best Latin scholar ever. And so for him to like leave out the definite articles in front of the spirit, the water, and the blood would be a huge deal. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if he was trying to deceive people and show it's not from the Latin or whatever, wouldn't he know Greek and Latin well enough? If Timothy Decker can figure this out, and if Dan Wallace can figure this out, that if you have no articles, it comes from the Latin, wouldn't he know that? And wouldn't he try to put those articles in there? And at the end of the day, why is verse 8 like that as well? And so, is there some alternative? Because it just seems strange to critique Erasmus like that. But anyway, that's just my 5 cents. So here we have, the omission of definite articles in both verse 7 and verse 8. We have pneuma agion. So sometimes we have agion pneuma. So it's basically exactly the same, except for articles, and this is around, it's like Jesus Christ or Christ Jesus. So we see this in Erasmus's 4th or 5th. Okay, so we see the definite articles are put into verse 7, but not in verse 8. And so, but the main issue is the pneuma agion instead of agion pneuma. So then we see Stephanus's first edition, that would be his 1546. So the 2 chi here is different, and the SC instead of SIN. But maybe that's not the actual issue. But it does seem like it. Yeah, it is the issue. There's no movable nu there. And here these are around the wrong way. 2 chi or chi 2. Then Stephanus's 2nd and 3rd edition. So that would be his 1549 and his 1550. So it has everything good except for the movable nu. That's all. And that's in verse 8. These 3 are, right at the... Because the thing is, ultimately, the comma starts here and goes to here. That's the comma Johannine. Now, I'm glad that he's actually got the rest of verse 8 there, because that goes a little bit further and you can see other things. But the comma is the same. There are variants in verse 6 as well. So should we go back and look at those, sort of thing? A lot of the Latin manuscripts are in Christ Jesus there. Beza, so he has the K there. I guess the 2, is it K2 or... Father and Word and Holy Spirit. Okay, so here it just has Father, Word, and Holy Spirit. So it's almost like an Oxford comma sort of issue, type of thing. So in his octavos 3 to 5. So then he says, admittedly, many editions are very near identical to Scrivener's final form. Beza's 3 octavo editions only add and in verse 7. And so what you got to look to as well, these octavo editions, Beza did 5 main editions. Okay, now I actually talked to Timothy about this, saying when I was doing the a critique of his articles on just going through 1 John in Textus Receptus manuscripts, I was talking to him about these octavo editions. My understanding was Beza did 5 editions, and sometimes he would bring out an octavo edition, which might just be in Greek, or it wouldn't have all the annotations and things like that. But Timothy was saying, no, there are actual changes in the text in some of these. And I was like, oh, okay. Because I know what had happened with Stephen Boyce when I did a debate on Revelation 16:5 and the woman caught in adultery. When I did a debate with him, the issue was that he brought up the 1611 text of Beza and said, look, they changed they changed Revelation 16:5 back to the word holy, because the people around Beza, they didn't like the reading, and then they changed it. As soon as he died, like in 1605, the next edition, they changed it. But when I studied that manuscript, because I asked where he got it from, and he sent me a link, and I went through, and it was actually the 1565 edition reprinted. Sometimes they do that, they'll print like Erasmus's 3rd edition or something like that, and they just reprint those things so people can compare them and look at those things. And so That's all they did. It wasn't like it was a new edition. And so that's why I've always thought that these Octavo editions were just sort of like aberrations, or they were like sort of like pocket Bibles, just with only Greek in it, instead of having the Greek and the two Latin columns, one being the Vulgate, one being a translation from Beza, and then a whole heap of annotation, like, this whole volume that you have to carry around with you. It was just like a little pocket sort of thing. But apparently I could be wrong on that. So talking with Timothy about this, he said, no, I think you're wrong on that. I guess I'm just not 100% sure what to do with that. So I'm going to, and I actually used to avoid looking at the Octavo editions just because they seem to just be, you got your 5 main editions, and these Octavo editions seem to be just offshoots of those major ones, where he was saying, no, there's some of these have readings that are not in the major editions. And it's like, oh, that's different. But perhaps it's a typo or whatever, but I guess we'll eventually work that out. So Beza's 3 Octavo editions only add and in verse 7. Even closer is the first 3 Stephanus editions that leave out the final nu at the very end of verse 8. So it's not really a comma issue, but it's the end of verse 8. And a final nu is, it's not really a huge deal. This is a small detail, yet they are the only 3 that do this. This is relevant because the Textus Receptus is known for cleaning up spelling and grammar, like an apple versus a apple, leaving off the final nu at the end of verse 8 with verse 9 beginning with the vowel, sets up slight spelling error. This is probably why the 4th edition of Stephanus cleaned it up further. From then on, it stuck. Nevertheless, very early on in the tradition and before influences and motivations set in, the Textus Receptus tradition excluded the comma, see reading number 2, and read just like our modern Greek New Testaments, NA 28, United Bible Society 6th edition, SBLGNT, and TH Greek New Testament. So that's the SBL Greek New Testament and the Tyndale House, Robinson and Pierpont Byzantine text form, and Hodges and Farstead majority text. Perhaps the most unique is the Complutensian polyglot version, the rendering of which is very similar to GA 629, but without the Latinizations. So that's just become, because it's a parallel Latin and Greek, it's like, no, it's just from Latin, but it does have, if he's going to strain at little issues here and say the final nu, or some of these other ands and twos and things like that, if they matter, well, surely the pros, the from, is it apo, sorry, yeah, the apo is in the GA 629 in the Greek. It's not in the Latin, so it's actually different. So how can it just be a back translation from the Latin there when it's simply not? And anyway, I'll talk about some other issues. We'll just try and keep this flowing. Timothy says, what I hope to demonstrate is the variety within the TR tradition. Scrivener follows Beza's final folio edition of 1598, but there are 7 other choices among the TR tradition. Why is Beza's deemed the best? Well, they chose him 99.99% of the time. Only one of the Greek manuscripts reads identically with Scrivener's. What makes GA 2318, an 18th century manuscript, the best of the 10? It's like, no, that's there is information that is simply lost, and it's been confused. Like, even just conflating Codex Montfortianus with Codex Britannicus is a huge issue. And people don't well, James White seemed to admit it on his show the other day. I think he must have watched, 10 minutes of my program and gone, oh, there's a difference, or maybe TurretinFan told him. But either way, there are manuscripts that the information's there, but people are just simply not looking at this issue. The thing is, it's like, which text are we following here? Or how come we can get the text of Bryannius? The Johannine comment and Joseph Bryannius. And like I mentioned, how come we can get this text here when I compare it to Scrivener and it's identical except for Holy Spirit is around the other way. It says Spirit Holy. But it's identical. How, it doesn't have a K here, an and. But I mean, so that's why, because there's all this other information out there. There's writings from the early church. I mean, Bryannius saying this would have been known to people. The works of Bryannius, the works of Emmanuel Callicus, the works that even some stuff that I just discovered the other day, but also the things that Mike Ferrando is constantly going through, finding the writings of the early church. I mean, look at this. This is Joseph Bryannius. So this is written in like 1820 or something, and it reads exactly as Scrivener, except for an and the Holy Spirit is around the other way, which seem very common. And it says here, for there are three which bear witness in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit, and these three are one. And there are three which bear witness on earth, the Spirit, the water, and the blood. And so he's quoting that. It's, so when it's like, okay, well, which manuscript? There's just so much that is in error with conflating the text of Montfortianus with Codice Britannicus and saying they're the same thing, of saying that GA 629 is just a copy of the Latin when it doesn't match with the Latin. And so, there's so many errors, and, I'm going through some of these marginal notes, and even Elijah Hixson is like, well, we can't tell that it's not written before Erasmus, but because the text matches Erasmus's third edition, we're just going to say that it's handwritten after that, So comparing the TR editions with the 10 Greek manuscripts, on both sides of the comma's authenticity have claimed that 3 of the 10 Greek manuscripts that include the comma match Stephanus's 1550 and Scrivener. So it's 221 in the margin, 2318 and 2473. See Elijah Hixson's The Greek Manuscripts of the Comma Johanneum, the ETC blog. And okay, he's got Young Textus and Reformed. So that's Taylor de Soto. So he's talking about that issue as well. Okay, so we're actually nearly finished, which is probably a good thing. So I'll just read through this and the conclusion, and that seems to be it. So having just worked through the variations among TR editions above, I disagree with both of them. Okay, so he's disagreeing with these readings. In my own examination of 221 in the margin, 2318 and 2473, I have concluded that only manuscript 2318 written in the 18th century is an identical match. So, it has the final new or doesn't have a final new. You know what I mean? Identical match to the commonly standardized modern edition of the Textus Receptus by Scrivener, 1881. While the 2473 was close, it was missing the final new, or what I jokingly call in my Greek class, the rarely absent nu. This small spelling variation explained above is helpful to determine from which of the TR editions it was likely copied. Probably the famous and very popular Stephanus's Edito Regia, or the Royal Edition of 1550. GA 2473 was dated to 1634 after Beza, and the KJV and the Elsevier's 1633 editions, which is where the term Textus Receptus was made common. The marginal reading and the text of 221 implies it is similar, but we cannot know for sure what the hand left out, see part 2. Therefore, the final form of the TR's comma has only one Greek manuscript behind it. You see this type of strange thing. Anyway, I think I've explained it enough to just... It does seem like he is really straining to say a final nu, which isn't really the comma section. Is there are 3 that bear witness, and it's like in heaven, and then the in earth. So that section is a comma. It's not actually all of that. And so, if you included verse 6, you would have another variant that a lot of texts have this variant, but hardly any Bibles actually go with it. Even critical text Bibles don't go with it. So this small spelling variation explained above is helpful to determine from which of a TR editions it was likely copied. Probably the famous... okay, so I just did read through that. Okay, yes, so of the 30 TR editions I have collated, only 10 are an identical match to Scrivener's TR, the first being Stephanus's 4th edition of 1551. Therefore, it was not known in its final form among the Protestants and Reformers until the latter half of the 16th century. I don't know. This type of argumentation it just doesn't seem... I mean, I enjoy looking at earlier editions of the Textus Receptus and wondering why things got changed and amended. And usually this type of thing is spoken about in annotation. So Erasmus will talk about these type of things, or Beza will talk about this, and he's got heaps of annotations. John Mill has like 10 pages on the comma. Well, even Beza, he has like 10 pages. I think John Mill has like 30 pages on the comma. He's got so much written on the comma, and he goes in depth into all this type of stuff. So that's where I would say the next place to go would be. And the thing is too, you can open up John Mill's on the CSNTM page or website. Go to printed material, and you can look at Mill. And if you have Google Lens on your phone, which if you've got a Google app, it's got a little square thing that you can click, and it will just show you. You can translate it from Latin straight into English just on the fly. So you can actually go through and you can sort of make out what's going on. And you can read through these pages and see what John Mill's saying. And he's very good. He's very accurate. So because of this movable nu issue, they're saying, it was only around in the latter part of the 16th century. But it's sort of like, well, we're not really following all those. You know what I mean? And if people say to me, which Textus Receptus do you follow? I'm just like, well, it's the underlying text of the King James. And so most of these issues were ironed out by Beza, but there was a few tiny little sprinklings that the King James guys ironed out themselves. And they perfected the text. And so going back to Erasmus's editions, out of curiosity and just knowing history, I do it. But in no way am I tied to those things. And does it rattle me to go, well, Erasmus didn't have it in his first 2 editions? It's like, well, he obviously came around and read his annotations. If you read his annotations and read them thoroughly, you'll see he offers a lot of defense of why the comma should be included. Conclusion. This being the final segment of this 7-part series, I do not wish to shake the faith of believers, but I would ask you to consider the evidence and ask yourself, do I believe the comma is authentic because of the tradition accepted by the papists? Oh my God. And most Protestants at the time of the Reformation or post-Reformation, or because all the evidence points to it? For me, the choice is simple. Well, I mean, if you don't have a text in the Reformation period, you know what I mean? Like around the time, like where was the text that he believes with every jot and tittle or whatever is his text in that period of time? Or where is the critical text in that period? They don't have horses in this race for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And then they're just critiquing a progression. So it's a bit like someone making a car or a jet plane, and they start from scratch of, just earlier planes, and it goes through to the jet plane, and someone who, like some country who's never even made a plane, they're just critiquing it and saying, oh, look at this progression. Where did they get that part from the older edition, or the old? It's like comparing iPhones. Well, obviously the latest iPhone is the best. It's just like going back through all the old iPhones and saying, well, did you realize that the iPhone 3 was really dodgy with its battery life? It's like, well, okay, well, that's great, but I advocate for this one. So anyway, I'm glad I've read through that. And look, in all honesty, I'm glad that this work has been done. I will put as much of this as I possibly can into my website, or in a sense where I'll double check it and go through it. Now, I think I do have most of this on my website. I'll just quickly check. I think I shut down the Bryannius page. Yeah, I did. I'm not sure why I did that. But if I go back to 1 John, 1 John 5:7, and I'll just quickly go to my website. And so TR editions, okay, so I've got the Complutensian written out here, Desiderius Erasmus, first 2 editions, and then I've got his other editions, and I've checked these with the pictures that I have here. 1550, so I don't have the 1549 or 1546. So, but as far as I know, the 3rd and 4th edition are the same, but I will have to check that because he's saying they're not the same. I think one has a movable new and the other doesn't. Then you're looking at Beza. His first edition was in Latin. Then I've got his 1588 here. And 1598. I've got the first edition of the Elzevir family here, but I don't have the other editions, which I should really have there. I've got the Scrivener edition and then some other Greek there. So it's interesting that it is in the Greek Orthodox writings, but I'm pretty sure this section is in a smaller font or in italic. So I should really put that in an italic. But apart from that, guys, I think I'm going to just finish this because I am getting pretty tired and it is nearly 11:30 at night and I should have been in bed at 10. So I'm just running off sheer caffeine at the moment. Embryo7 says, good morning, brothers. What time is it in Australia, Nick? It's 5:40 here in Corpus Christi in Texas. So it is 11:22 at night. Embryo3 says, as though I heard them not is a very good example, Nick. I was just looking at that earlier this week. That's so interesting. Exactly. It's the final edition we should consider. Yeah, look, I don't mind going back through all this, but I guess it's like going to Tyndale's and going, look, Tyndale had this other reading. It's not exactly as the King James. And it's like, well, yeah, the King James is the final thing. Like, well, what do you want to do about it? Like, you have different editions because there are differences, or else you could just go to every verse and go, look, like you could just go from Beza's 1588 to 1598 and go, look at the differences and just like lose your mind about it. But it's like, well, he's still working on the text. These guys were translating into many different languages and looking at language editions, and sometimes it's not until something is translated into another language that you see an issue in the text, and it's glaringly obvious that there's a problem because you're trying to translate it and you're like, actually, it's not making any sense. And so that's when you investigate more. And so this was happening all over Europe. Embryo says, wow, I was checking out that last link you sent with the 2 mics. Excellent resource. Thanks. And Embryo says, question, is the King James Bible considered as the TR in English? Yes. So I might quickly go to my homepage here. Now, I usually point people to this quotation, which is on the front page. And it says here, Hills also pointed out that the King James Bible represents a unique form of the received text, and he believed it was this precise form which should be followed. And so the words in bold are there to show this type of meaning. Now, this is in David Cloud's book, and it's sort of got some quotations. It has the ellipsis dots there, which can skip over a few pages, but it's trying to piece together this type of theme. So Hill says the King James Version ought to be regarded not merely as a translation of the Textus Receptus, but also as an independent variety of the Textus Receptus. But what do we do in those few places in which the several editions of the Textus Receptus disagree with one another? Which text do we follow? The answer to this question is easy. We are guided by the common faith. Hence, we favor that form of the Textus Receptus upon which more than any other God, working providentially, has placed the stamp of his approval, namely the King James Version, or more precisely, the Greek text underlying the King James Version. So it's very clear about what he is saying, and the vast majority of people who have ever been on my channel have been in agreement with this. So when it's like we're trying to pit TR editions against each other, it's like, well, we go with this. Now, one thing, if you actually look up this quote, and I've got Hills there, the very next thing he says is this is like represented in Scrivener's edition, where I notice Hills doesn't say this, and I'm sort of glad because I'm like, Scrivener did a very good job, but there are some places where I think he made unnecessary changes. So I like what's said here, and I agree with what's said there. When you add the Scrivener line, it's like, well, close, but no gold star. You get a silver star with a cookie and some milk and all the rest of it, but it's it's not a gold star. You know what I mean? And that's why people still go back to the King James. And so anyway, I think I'll shut this all down. And yeah, I will continue to do more comma material. And yeah, I'll do something on the weekend, definitely. I've still got to finish the Ankerberg series that I'm doing, which is quite interesting. It's interesting going through that material. But apart from that, guys, I think I am going to go to bed and snore my head off. And I'll see you guys later. Thanks for joining us. And God bless you guys.